company to salvage World War II aircraft from the Pacific, and specifically look for the MIs from those crash sites as the last and final search. Known sites of World War II aircraft have long since been scrapped and making it a difficult challenge to find missing ones. A great deal of the salvage operation entails many hours of research before an in-country search can begin. I pick an aircraft that I believe would be worthwhile and is not lost in the deep of the ocean. I examine the missing crew reports, if the missing aircraft was last seen and by who. Next, a country study is done. Transportation, weather patterns, language. There are over 700 dialects in this particular country. Maps, go through World War II maps and present-day maps. Travel permits and security clearances. The particular area has a large amount of villages that are very primitive. Stone Age men and very suspicious and shy outsiders. Cannibalism is not known to exist in the lowlands today, but Vice President Rockefeller's son was reported to be a victim in the 60s. In this country of Indonesia, the government tries to control access to these areas for the protection of the local people and of the outsiders. This particular aircraft and pilot I was looking for was the P-47D Razorback, very rare in today's standard. The pilot of this aircraft was Second Lieutenant Ellis Frankfort, known as Flip to his fellow pilots. In this painting, Second Lieutenant Ellis Frankfort poses in the cockpit of his plane, a P-47D Razorback. This is the only wartime photo I have of Flip in his P-47D Razorback. This book is entitled Kirby's Thunderbolts, the 348th Fighter Group of World War II by John Stanaway. The 348th Fighter Group was the parent organization of the 342nd Fighter Squadron that Flip Frankfort had belonged to. In the book, it states that Flip had confirmed kills on October 22nd, 1943 of an Oscar, on December 26th, 1943 of a Tony, December 31st, 1943 of a Tony probable. In this photograph shows Neil Kirby, one of the top aces in the South Pacific, was the commander of the 348th Fighter Group. There you see a Tony in the background, just very similar to the one that Flip had shot down on December 26, 1943. This is a map drawing of the geographical area that Flip's plane was found in. As you can see, Biak Island is just off the north coast of Irian Jaya on the main island of New Guinea. Australia to the south, Philippines to the northwest, right in the Pacific, right along the equator. This is a drawing of Biak Island. The area of search will be starting from the southeast of the island, designated by the two V's, the yellow and the green. The other information I'll explain on that close-up. A little bit closer look at Biak Island. If you'll notice the green ring around the island, there were certain facts we knew about May 27, 1944, on the day that Flip was lost. The morning of May 27, 1944, the 41st Infantry Division was landing on the Bosniak Beach area, which is designated by the information on the lower right there. The green indicates the areas that the invasion ships were covering. They cover the entire island, as you can see. Off to the far right, you'll see 342 Fighter Squadron, and that's the direction that the 342nd Fighter Squadron was heading to provide coverage for the island. We knew a lot of facts from the reports that the 342nd Fighter Squadron was about 15,000 feet and about 5 miles southeast of the island, heading northwest. time was about 4:30 in the afternoon on May 27, 1944. The invasion was going poorly at that time. That whole green strip along the Bosniak beach area had a lot of caves and cliffs in through there. Our intelligence information gave us the idea that there wasn't as many Japs on the island, and our objective was to take the Jap aerodrome there just to the west along the southern coast of Biak. If you'll notice, there's two V-shaped cones, and that was the initial V pattern I ran a search on. We started from the Bosniak beach area. We knew that Flip had was last seen going over Bosniak beach chasing a Zero. It could have been an Oscar or a KI-43. We set up the search, if you'll notice, on this V pattern. The first initial search was on yellow. I went up through the center. We wanted to go as far as Sauri before we established another base camp if we didn't find the aircraft initially. We run that pattern because it will cover the most amount of ground. We knew that Flip's plane wasn't sighted turning to the north out of the island or to the south by any of the invasion ships. Nobody on the Bosniak beach on our invasion force had noticed an American plane going down or any sights of smoke or fire. So that right along the beach area itself, on both the southern and northeast coast there, we didn't bother to do a search initially. We started out on the first time running abreast. We were probably 100 yards apart on the initial search team, which included about 15 other local people plus myself. Hanky Wakum, which is a villager from that Biak Island, knows that area quite well, and also Paul Manabu, who's my guide and interpreter. We ran the search. Took us about 4 hours just to cover up to Sauri. Fortunately, there was a lot of tracks or trails that made the movement a lot easier than we'd initially anticipated. When we got to Sauri village, we had decided to establish a base camp, like I said, and then start out again. We initiated our V pattern again. When we got to a small village of Makabo, which is just a little bit off of the track of a due northwest track of the plane, the direction the plane would have been traveling, the jungle got quite intense at that point. Foliage and stuff was real thick, and it made moving quite difficult. It wasn't. At about 5 p.m. on June 17, 1990, we located Flip's plane about 7,000 yards northwest of Sauri, about a kilometer north of the village of Makabo. It was hot, very humid. I was glad to find the aircraft. We'd spent most of the day starting at about 8 o'clock in the morning, then 4 hours to Sauri, and then about 5 hours from Sauri to the plane crash. We were all carrying very light pack loads to cover the search distance. It's about 14 kilometers, and I didn't bring my cameras because of all the extra carrying weight. We brought water, which was the most important thing in this hot, humid area. The preliminary inspection of the plane confirmed that it was a P-47, but the identity of it being Flip's plane cannot be proved with this preliminary inspection, and we were losing daylight. We left the crash site and requested that the village chief guard and protect the site for us. The chief's name was Jakob Macher. It's no relation to me with the German pronunciation of Fenstermaker. The next 5 weeks had me 250 miles southwest on Biak, of the Biak area on the main island in Guinea, in Irian Jaya, disassembling and making ready for shipment 4 Japanese aircraft to come back to the States. I had Hanky Wakum go back to the Christ site with the villagers as a look for the vertical fin, which was missing on the preliminary inspection. He took my still camera, and like a trooper that he is, he found it. And as you can see from the still photo, that was very late in the evening. At the end of July 90, I had photo in hand and returned to the States. I sent a letter with the photo to Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama Historical Research Center to start the ball rolling on the recovery of the remains. The response was less than welcome. Because of, quote, budget and manpower constraints, they would get to my request within 180 days. In April of 91, I again returned to the crash site with video camera to make sure the aircraft and Flip's remains were not disturbed, and survey some Japanese remains in a blown up cave about 7 kilometers from Flip's crash site. In May 91, confirmation from Maxwell came in, and the Casualty Services office out of Arlington, Virginia contacted me and also notified SILHI, the Central Identification Lab, Hawaii, of a pending recovery. I sent SILHI a copy of my video and a letter answering their questions, and I never heard from them again. I believe about September 91, I contacted Colonel Frank Love, U.S. Air Force retired, a member of the 342nd Fighter Squadron, Flip Squadron, and asked if he could review some of the videos of Flip's crash site. He said he'd be in Connecticut at the 348th reunion, and he'd get a VCR there to review the tapes. He and the others confirmed with the blue stripe on the vertical as the 342nd Squadron, and some of the details I gave him with the crash site. He gave me the phone number of Ben, Captain Benz. He was the flight leader of Flip's, and he could only add very little more than what I knew, except that the written battle debriefing was an error, and that Flip was, as I assume, not last seen 5 miles southeast of Biak at 1,500 feet, but at 1,500 feet crossing the beach area of Biak, heading northwest in hot pursuit of a Zero, or possibly an Oscar. The 342nd Fighter Squadron that afternoon spotted 7 Oscars and a Tony at a few hundred feet off the deck, intent on strafing the landing force there. First part is Japanese cave. The second part of this video is a site survey of Flip's crash site. Let's see, 27594. P-47D.
A few months ago, he came here to look his pesawat. Oh.
Masuk. Ini jatuh gitu. Iya. Tuh kalau dia mulai ini baru dia udah keluar.
This would be the top of the left wing, the landing gear and the strut, the stub section.
Mereka mau tutup dia dengan tanah. Mereka dapat tutup ini. Tidak usah tutup dia. Kalau tutup dia nanti kami tidak bisa terbangkai di sini. Dia tertakut banget. Berarti itu.
Ada bendera sini kelihatan dekat sana rumah. Ini dibalikin tuh. Ini balik.
Kembali dia ya.
Okay. Should have ejected this. Should have the cockpit.
And the side. It's like a window.
Yeah, but this whole assembly should have be put over here against the tree. If he bailed out,
Gini ke dia. Sekarang kalau dia waktu 20 lebih. Ini sudah perang selesai 40 lebih. Support of the spar. Front spar going down, engine mounts gone. Pegang hati-hati. Saya bilang kau pegang hati-hati. Yang kau pegang sekarang dia bergerak.
Mungkin di bawah gitu. Ada
He's got to be down in there.
Kan waktu yang kedua kali kita lihat sampai sekarang belum ada.
Yeah, I don't. Still waiting for that information to come back. Yeah, it'd be too difficult to dig down in there.
Too small.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. We knew that Flip was probably chasing an Oscar. Now, Ben said he thought it was a zero, but in fact it was an Oscar. We knew the Oscars and one single Tony were attacking the beach area. About 200 meters from Flip's crash site, there's an Oscar. The crash site of the Oscar has the same dynamics of the energy and in the crash, and I did a survey on that. I'm still not able to tie in this second aircraft to Flip's, but at 200 meters from Flip's crash site, it might have been the one that Flip was going after, and he might have, the Oscar might have turned inside of Flip at high rate of speed. Oscar was quite maneuverable. Flip was probably traveling close to 370, maybe 400 miles an hour, and they both high-speed stalled. That the information is my speculation, but we got the information on that Oscar, and you'll see it in just a moment.
Fill up on there,
Yeah,
and then it's going to be down?
Yeah, nine, yeah, it's true. 9-8.
Yeah. 9-8. Kalau di sana yang bagus. Mana? Yang dari juga.
Masih banyak wire. Oh, yang itu terbaik.
Tujuh berapa katanya?
7.2.
7.7 should be.
7.7.
Yeah.
7,7. Itu perhitungan apa itu?
Saya lagi heran.
Caranya bagaimana itu?
Orang pintar-pintar ini. Coba bilang kalau di pinggir kah?
Iya.
Tapi ini pasti buaya, tengah-tengah wire kan putar ini. Kalau kan jatuh jadi pas atau kali wire dapat mesti kena. Tapi tidak.
Kalau kecepatan wajar, apa?
Wire punya kecepatan dan ini tembak sama begitu.
So P-47 is 200 meters this way. Which way am I pointing now? I'm pointing what? East?
Ini barat ya. Kita di barat sekarang ya. Timur. Ini matahari naik man.
Where the hell's sun?
Matahari masuk di sini, Pak.
Masuk di mana?
Dari sini. Masuk sana.
Masuk ke sana.
Ya, jadi kita sekarang di timur. Timur sana.
East.
East, so we're southeast. So I'm facing southeast. At 200 meters, the P-47, and then the KF-43 is here. The number 98 on the bottom of the that tail cone near the landing gear door.
Ini langkah.
rear horizontal on the 47.
Okay, the next part of the video is the village of Makarabo. They not only protected the site, but when Hanky Wakum had found the vertical, they kept the vertical and safekeeping in the village there. A very small village, and it's they're just like us.
It's about what, we'll make it back in what, two hours?
Huh?
We'll make it back in about 2 hours, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we'll make it.
Selamat sore.
Selamat sore.
This little
Itu yang ada benderanya itu Pak.
Yeah.
Sebuah dari kanan.
5-6.
5-6.
Awas bisa keluar. 5-6.
Kita pasang kemarin mah 15.
15 eh? Aduh 55.
Oh, we said over here.
Di situ ya. Ya begitu dulu.
Okay, now in the book.
Oh, nyamrung tidak benar.
Ini sama.
Ini daunnya.
Ya.
You can hold that up next to the tail,
Ya, coba dong ke sini.
or you stand over near the tail.
Oh ini memang.
Belum bye-bye nanti terus.
Itu jenisnya yang sama.
And we're about how far are we from the Christ site P47 now? About
1 kilo.
about 1 kilometer.
1 kilometer. Tidak apa-apa. Baru saya berdiri, tidak apa-apa. Ya. Berdiri yuk.
And then,
Pegang. Anak kecil-kecil pegang.
Anda nama?
Nama siapa? Dortius Makmaker.
Okay. And this is the little village. What's this name? This
Nama apa ini kampung ini? Makerbo.
Makrabo. And there's about what, 3 or 4 families here?
Ya.
Oh, smile.
Ya, dia ketawa-ketawa sedikit.
They were mana? We still got candy bars. If we give them to the parents will share them with the kids, right?
Yeah.
If we give them to the parents, then the parents will have some, and then the kids will have some too, right? On the candy bars.
Okay, bars.
Yeah, we got Hershey candy
Oh,
bars.
yeah, we give them.
We got 7.
We have 7. We give us all for
If we
them.
give them all to them,
Yeah, all to them.
we give them to the parents, then the parents will eat some, and then the kids will eat some.
Yeah. We give the two roll of biscuit food.
Okay, yeah. Okay,
and
good.
the 7.
Okay. Okay. We sent someone back to the.
She can follow us.
Okay.
This.
Okay. Terima kasih banyak.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oke sudah ya, anak-anak. Mister dia kasih dengan kue. Tadi dia foto. Ini sekarang dia bisa lihat. Tadi dia foto, langsung dia lihat. Tadi foto, langsung lihat di main. Tinggal nanti kalau ini dibesarkan, masuk di beta. Ini besar.
See what I had before we went into the other village, the little village.
Oh ya.
I had the camera on. It was already on.
Oh, yeah.
We were asking him if it was okay to take pictures.
Yeah.
It was already turned on. It was turned on when I was down at the bottom of that ditch coming when we were walking up. It was already on. See, there's pieces of bomb fins in the yards. There was a house along here that has a seat, an airplane seat.
Airplane seat.
Yeah, sitting out in front of it.
During the next few years, I never knew what happened to Flip. I got tangled up in legal problems with my business and never went back down again. I never heard again whatever happened to Flip. I lost contact with Colonel Love, and not until about September 9th, 1995, I got a call on the answering machine, and it was from Colonel Love, and he left a message asking if this was Bruce Fenstermaker, the fellow that had found Flip, and he wanted to get a hold of me. It was real important. I tried to call him back, but he beat me to it and called me the next day. He asked me if I knew that they were going to bury Flip on the 16th of September. And I said, no. I said, I didn't know anything about it. And he said, didn't the government notify you? And I said, no. I said, last time I had contact with the government was when I sent off the information to Silhigh, and that was it. And Colonel Love was a little surprised about that. He said, hey, do you mind if Charlie Hartman and a couple of the other guys give you a call about Flip? They'd like to talk to you. And I said, no, I'd be honored to talk to them. I said, I've been following the 348th Fighter Group, and I knew a lot about the guys. And at that point, Flip sort of was, he was very much a family member to me. I talked to Charlie, and that was about Tuesday, and the funeral was coming up on Saturday. I got in contact with the Methodist minister from the church there in Franklin, Virginia, where Flip was going to be buried on Thursday. The minister said that the whole town was coming out for the funeral, and that he wanted to ask me some questions. The main thing, we wanted to know if Flip had suffered at all, and I said no. I said it was pretty well instantaneous on the crash, and I don't think he suffered at all. I couldn't make it back to the funeral because Uncle Sam should have notified me. There's no way I could have made it. I sent some flowers, and I talked to Philip, Flip's brother, on the following Monday. This newspaper article is very interesting. It came out in July 22nd, 1995, months before the funeral. The Virginia pilot, this is the front page, and it states a World War II pilot will be buried with his parents in Franklin. His body and the wreckage of the P-47 were found in 1991 on a Pacific island. From the tape you can see actually the time periods and where the delays and everything came in. And the article itself is very interesting, and I'll do some close-ups on it. This article is by Frank Roberts. staff writer with Virginia Pilot. And off to the left side center is Philip Frankfort. He's the brother of Flip, and a real nice man to talk to. The article goes on to say that 51 years after his P-47 crashed as he pursued Japanese planes off West New Guinea, Winans Ellis Frankfort will be buried this fall beside his parents in Franklin. Frankfort's fighter plane and his body were discovered in 1991 by a Californian, but Frankfort's family was not notified until last fall. My first reaction was complete astonishment, said his older brother Philip Frankfort, who lives in Franklin Retirement Center. I was struck dumb, said Clifford A. Cutchins III, a close boyhood friend and fellow college student. We thought it had ended, but the discovery gives it the finality that it didn't have before. Frankfort's family had been told the plane went down at Biak Island, a Japanese refueling center, on May 27, 1944. Military reports said diving through the clouds in pursuit of Japanese planes, Philip Frankfort said. He learned last September that the plane crashed upside down in a jungle and that his brother's remains were in the cockpit. Winans Frankfort, who was a slender man with brown hair and blue eyes, and was known to most people as Ellis, will be buried September 16th in a civil and military ceremony in Poplar. In Poplar at the Poplar Springs Cemetery. Cutchins recently funded a scholarship in Frankfort's memory for Corps cadet students at Virginia Tech. And Frankfort's family donated his medals, some personal items, and a photo of Frankfort and his plane to the Corps Museum. The Fellowship Hall of Franklin's High Street United Methodist Church was named the Ellis Frankfort Fellowship Halls years ago, after the flyer was presumed dead, which is ironic. Things do turn good for a tragedy like this. Cutchins, former board member of Sovereign Financial Corporation, the Norfolk-based bank that became Nations Bank after a 1991 merger, said it would be appropriate to perpetuate the name of someone who paid the ultimate price. Biak Island has about 2,000 residents, and Philip Frankfort believes natives may have seen the plane earlier, but they may have religious scruples about people's remains, he said, so they didn't tear up the site. After the discovery by Bruce Fenstermaker in May of 91, a team was dispatched from the Army Central Identification Lab at Hickam Air Base in Honolulu. That's still high. Thorne Helgeson, a civilian identification officer at Hickam, said the remains were taken to the lab where physical and dental studies helped identify them. Helgeson said it's not uncommon for planes or human remains to be found in the South Pacific, especially from World War II air crashes. He was unable to explain why the family wasn't notified until 3 years after the body was discovered. That's an interesting point. Why? What we knew about Flip Frankfort in the subsequent searches of the incident location that proved negative back in 1945, there was a statement on February 16, 1946 that stated he was presumed dead by the War Department. On May 24, 1949, just a few months before I was born, the American Graves Registration Service reviewed the case and recommended that Frankfort's remains be declared non-recoverable. From September 15th to the 21st in 1994, a U.S. Army Central Identification Laboratory recovery team from Hawaii, Silhai, excavated the crash site, reported pilot-related material and aircraft wreckage. Aircraft data plates, numbers were noted, and the human remains and collected materials were escorted to Silhai for proper identification. Ironically, the notification of discovery came just months after the Winans Ellis Frankfort 44 Memorial Scholarship was established at Virginia Tech by close friend and classmate Clifford A. Cutchins. Even as a little boy, Frankfort had a passion for planes. He had books about them, everything he could get. Said his sister-in-law Ray, he had a propeller on his bedroom wall. Frankfort left Virginia Tech in 1942 during his second year to join the Army Air Corps. As a 21-year-old second lieutenant, Frankfort had amassed 400 hours of combat flying time. 4 months before his death, his plane had been hit by Japanese fire while participating in what his commanding officer, Major William M. Banks, described as potentially the most hazardous mission ever undertaken by a P-47 aircraft. It was a volunteer mission to provide cover for a Navy plane over territory infested with enemy planes, according to Corps Review, a publication of the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets alumni. The information based on Army documents said the Navy plane had rescued 10 downed pilots while the P-47 pilots fended off the enemy aircraft and drew ground fire. It's ironic, there's 10 downed pilots that were rescued because of what Flip and the other guys in his squadron had helped. I wonder if those 10 downed pilots are alive today and how many of them knew that Flip finally came home. Frankfort, who was attached to the 342nd Fighter Squadron of the 348th Fighter Group stationed in New Guinea, was awarded the Air Medal with 2 Oak Leaf clusters, Distinguished Flying Cross, and Silver Star. He also was awarded the Purple Heart for action in October '43 in a small clearing near the Fly River, Japanese-held territory. His plane ran out of fuel as he returned to base after providing cover for 8 B-25 bombers. According to Frankfort's own account, he bailed out at 1,200 feet and landed atop a 150-foot tree. He broke a rib and suffered bruises when he fell trying to get to the ground. After spending 2 days wandering through the jungle, he was rescued when he entered a village of friendly natives. Spent the next 4 days ferrying who spent the next 4 days ferrying him downriver to a plantation housing American forces. Cutchins recalled how he and Frankfort played on the same football team at Franklin High School. I was right guard, he was left. In 1939, we were undefeated. They went together to the Rose Bowl game in Durham, North Carolina in 1941, Cutchins said. Dated a couple of North Carolina girls, took them to the game, then up to Franklin for a dance. Frankfort's father, Harry, a lumber salesman for Union Camp Corp., took the boys to several Duke University football games. Philip Frankfort, a retiree, he spends a moderate amount of time traveling, also flew P-47s, but with the 9th Air Force in the European theater. That was just a coincidence, he said. I didn't have any of those exciting adventures. If his brother had survived, Philip Frankfort said, I don't know what else would have done when he got out of the Air Corps. He might well have opted for a career in the Air Force. As an afterthought, I think the problem with the delay in the recovery of Flip was because the Senate Select Committee hearings on MIAs and POWs had not started as yet when the government was notified of Flip's plane being found. A very special thanks to Senator Smith of New Hampshire and Congressman Bob Dorn in California, whose heated debates, I believe, were instrumental in getting the MIA POW process back on track again. After the funeral, Philip Frankfort, Flip's brother, had sent a couple of photographs of the flowers we had sent. He also sent a videotape of the news broadcast. 2 days before the funeral, my wife, Linda, and I tried to send some flowers that were appropriate. Linda said since I knew him as Flip, my relation to him, to the military, a banner should be put across the flowers saying, "Welcome home, Flip." My verse on the card said, "For Flip Frankfort, you gave up your tomorrows for our today."
Thank you, Velma. He was 21 and fighting for freedom when he disappeared in the Pacific during World War II. Today, more than 50 years later, the remains of P-47 pilot Ellis Frankfort returned home. His body was only recently found in the jungle of a small Pacific island. The Army sent a representative to escort Frankfort's remains home. His family will bury him in the family plot in Franklin on Saturday.
He will be buried there with Mother and Dad, and I know that they will know that he is there beside them.
Ellis Frankfort was credited with downing at least 2 Japanese fighter planes.
In the spirit of Hampton Roads, WWII TV presents Regina Mobley, Mike Lewis, Karen Jones, and Brian Smith. This is 13 News at 11.
He was missing in action for more than 50 years, but a local man is finally back home, resting in peace. Colin Powell is back from retirement. He's in Virginia tonight, signing his new book. And a pet dog turns on a family, mauling 2 children and their mother. And good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Mike Lewis. Regina has the night off. Topping our report tonight, he was only 21 and fighting for freedom when his plane was shot down over the South Pacific. Today, more than 50 years later, the fallen World War II hero was finally laid to rest in his hometown of Franklin. David Brandt has the story.
Lieutenant Ellis Frankfort can finally rest in peace. It's been a long journey back to his hometown of Franklin, Virginia. More than a half-century ago, Frankfort flew high above the South Pacific. His friends knew him as Flip. Those who served with him knew him as a man who believed in what he was doing.
Ellis was such a gutsy person, and he was determined to go out and do something for his country.
But at the age of 21, Frankfort's plane was shot down. He was never heard from again. Until this year, when a plane's wreckage was discovered on a remote island. Inside, the remains of Lieutenant Ellis Frankfort. For hundreds of friends and family members, this funeral allows them a sense of closure, a chance to bid farewell to a man loved by many. But this is not so much a time to mourn. Frankfort's brother says that happened a long time ago.
Well, this is more of a celebration of his being returned.
Returned to American soil, buried with honor. And as the ceremony moved along, those who made it back alive spent time thinking about those who did not, those still unaccounted for.
It's such an emotional thing. Just think 51 years later, they care that much.
Well, I'm a World War II veteran, and it's just good to have him back.
David Brandt, 13 News, Franklin, Virginia.
And as a tribute to Lieutenant Frankfort, a scholarship fund has been set up at Virginia Tech, where he went to school. Another news.
I was connected to the Frankfort family in 3 ways. I lived near their home, I attended their church, and I went to college at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. The Frankfort home where Ellis grew up faced Clay Street on the corner of Beeman Street. I was born in November 1944 and knew Ellis's parents as well as his brother Philip and Philip's wife and 4 children. Philip's 2 girls were a little older than I was, but I was 3 years ahead in school of his twin sons, Flip and Mac. One of my earliest memories was lying on their living room floor watching Howdy Doody on a small black and white screen TV. The Frankfort home was the place to be for neighborhood kids because of the big wraparound porch, large yard, and Kool-Aid with real sugar Mrs. Frankfort provided on hot days. Most of us in the neighborhood attended the High Street United Methodist Church in Franklin. As a young child, I was aware that the church had built a new structure called the Frankfort Memorial Church House, named for Ellis Frankfort, who was lost in World War II. I was standing there in 1954 when the cornerstone was sealed and the building was dedicated. Only later did I learn that Ellis's mother donated most of the funds she received from Ellis's government survivors benefit to the church. That structure served not only the church, but many community events were held there as well. There was also the Virginia Tech connection. Philip Ellis and I attended what was then called VPI, Virginia Polytechnic Institute. And as was required at the time, we had to be members of the Corps of Cadets, a 24/7 military college with also a civilian student body. There is now a Corps museum that has a display honoring Ellis. Franklin native and Ellis classmate Cliff Cutchins donated funds to the Corps for a scholarship in honor of Ellis. In the early 1900s, I began to hear that Ellis's remains had been located and would eventually be returned to Franklin for a proper burial. Gaynell Riddick, in her wonderful book on the Ellis Frankfort Story, documents quite well the story of natives finding the remains and the series of events that transpired from the recovery to the funeral in Franklin. She asked me to write a few thoughts regarding my recollection of that funeral. In 1995, the funeral was held at the Poplar Springs Cemetery in Franklin. Several hundred people attended on a Saturday. I especially recall seeing members of the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets, regimental staff in full dress uniform walking up to the burial site. They were greeted by several Corps alumni who shook hands with them as they walked. I thought their attendance was especially meaningful since these students were the top officers in the Corps, and there was a football game that afternoon requiring their attendance. It was obvious someone paid for a private plane flight since there was only one way to get there to attend both the funeral and the game 225 miles away. There was a traditional flyover in the missing man formation, only at this time they were planes from World War II. The honor guard respectfully folded the American flag, presented it to Ellis's brother Philip, who was saluted, and Philip returned the salute. Philip was also a pilot who served in Europe in World War II, while Ellis flew missions in the Pacific area. For me as a kid growing up in Ellis's neighborhood and learning at an early age that he was missing in action, the funeral was a source of pride and satisfaction that Ellis's remains had been found, properly transported back to his home, and that a proper burial had been given. The funeral is not the end of the story. It will live on in our collective memories for many years to come.
Man, now you can be seated because Gaynell wants to introduce you to one of our special guests.
Before I do what I plan to do, I want to tell the congregation, whenever I hear "Let there be peace on earth," I think of our choir. Last year, I took them to Pennsylvania after they did that wonderful recording, and they wanted to sing somewhere, in the church somewhere. And I finally came up with the idea that a good place would be at the World War II Memorial in front of that Wall of Honor. And that's what they did. Folks, to have heard our choir stand in front of those 4,000 stars that represent those of ours that were lost in World War II, and let them sing, "Let There Be Peace on Earth." I hope you won't forget when you sing the next time. Imagine our choir standing in front of that wall. It's a moment. Well, I have this week, it's just an amazing thing that God just does incredible things. There was a story that came out this week. It touched my heart and made me cry. I bet some of you saw it. There was a plane, a Southwest Airlines plane, landed at Love Field in Dallas, Texas. Piloting that plane was a fella in his late 50s. Aboard that plane was special cargo. It was his dad. It was the remains of his father, who had been killed in the Vietnam War 52 years ago. And he brought him home. How many of you saw that? Touched my heart, so I thought, and then Chris is coming today. Because folks, this is a guy, I hope you've read my story. Not my story, the story I wrote about Ellis Frankfort. This is Chris St. Jean, who brought, not our son, but our member of our family of faith, Ellis Frankfort, home to us in 1995. For those of you who haven't read my story, just briefly, Ellis his plane went down in 1944 in the South Pacific, and for 50 years they didn't know he was just gone. His body was recovered eventually, and it was returned to us. And this fella, who was in Army Air Corps at the time, stationed at Fort Eustis, was sent to California to bring him home. Chris is retired from the Army. He's now, he went to Virginia Tech to teach, and now he's in the admissions department, I think, at Virginia Tech. And he just wanted to come and see us. He wanted to come back to Franklin. The only time he was here was that day that he brought Ellis home. So Chris, thank you for coming back to see us. And more importantly, thank you for bringing him home.
Well, I'll tell you, this is a bit emotional for me. I promise to be brief because I know I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch right now. So, but in 1995, I received a phone call. I was an aviator at Fort Eustis, a young major at the time, and I was asked, very fortunately, because a friend of mine worked in personnel and thought of me and said, will you go to Travis Air Force Base and escort Lieutenant Frankfort back here for burial? And it was a great honor for me to do that, and I've many wonderful memories of that. I will tell you that was the highest honor in my 26-year military career, was to do that and bring him back to this small town. And I came here in '95, and there was one hotel. I think you still have one hotel. My wife and I stayed that last night. But we came back, and I met some wonderful people, and I met Philip Frankfort and his gracious wife, Ray, and I met squadron buddies and Barkey Wright from the funeral home, and just a lot of wonderful people, and never returned. But I want to tell you how God weaves our lives together in this wonderful travesty, tapestry. And the pastor who spoke today about the different parts all becoming one, and the gifts that I learned from Billy today on your mission trip to Danville, and how all those pieces come together. Well, my life went on for 24 years, and I ended up in Blacksburg as a professor of military science at Virginia Tech. And I went over to their Corps of Cadets in the museum, and what do I see but this wonderful display to Lieutenant Frankfort. I had no idea it was at Virginia Tech. I knew he had attended Virginia Tech. And then I'm playing on the church softball team, and I run into a young man named Willie Jester, and Willie, so he missed the softball game, so I'm giving him a hard time. I said, where were you? And we needed you. Well, I was back home. Where's home? Franklin. I said, well, I went to Franklin once, and we got to talking, and he says, well, I used to cut the Frankfort's lawn, and then he went home and told Gaynell, little did I know Gaynell was writing this history of your church, and then she reached out to me, and then Gaynell came to Virginia Tech, and we visited, and since that time, Francis Babs Keene and Bill Keene, who are in our church, their roots run through Franklin, and we've just met so many different people, but your history is part of that body, and to see how this town and community has preserved its history from the humble beginnings of your first church to your second church down on High Street to this magnificent church that you have now, and the stories, the Sunday school teachers. The pastor was up here. I know, Pastor, you need those Sunday school teachers, but let me tell you something. If you haven't read the book that Gaynell put together and you're thinking about being a Sunday school teacher, the lives that you will touch are amazing. We ran into the Drakes yesterday that have Grayson and Emma's, right? Grayson and Emma's. And Neil was talking about his Sunday school teacher and the impact that Gaynell had on his life as a teacher in the history. So you have a very, very special community. This was something that I've wanted to do since I came in 1995. And God's final prompting for me to keep my promise to myself to return was an email I received this summer out of nowhere from Jenny Richardson, who I guess is the granddaughter of Phil and Ray Frankfort. And I understand Ray had passed away recently, and she was going through some of the family effects, and she found something and reached out to me, which reminded me of my promise to Gaynell many years ago to come back and visit, and I was determined to do that this summer, and it has been such a blessing to me, and your church is such a blessing. Your community is a blessing, and I will tell you, you are the hands and feet of Jesus and the work you're doing. So thank you for allowing my wife and I to be here today and worship with you as a part of your church family. Thank you.
My name is Jennifer Stevenson. I am a member here at High Street United Methodist Church, and for the past 17 years I've been the financial secretary here as well. I want to tell you a remarkable story of the parents' love for their son. All along we have known that the parents of Ellis Frankfort set up a gift to go to the area where Ellis' plane was down in World War II. It was mentioned in Gaynell Riddick's book, The Ellis Frankfort Story. The gift was established through the global ministries of the United Methodist Church. Our church would get random letters, one a year, and then it would skip a few years from the Office of Global Ministries, and it would state that a certain amount of money had been sent to missions in the Southeastern Asian area. Years ago, my curiosity was piqued, and I called Westbrook Parker, and we decided we would try to find out some information. The Frankfort family only knew a few details. I went through a great many folks at the Global Ministries office, but could not get any helpful information, and I finally gave up. Recently, in the last few months, I got another letter showing that $1,987.33 from that fund had been sent to a Malaysian mission, so I decided I would try again. I've been the church's financial secretary for 17 years, and in that time, I think I have gotten 12 letters during those years with amounts given. I imagine that they have been coming many years prior to my tenure. I called the Global Missions Office and spoke to 2 women, and I told them the brief story of Ellis Frankfort from Gaynell's book. They were very touched, and I asked, could we possibly just get some information on how these gifts happen? I figured I would get the runaround again, but I was pleasantly surprised when I received this lovely email, and this is what it said. On November 29th, 1946, Mr. and Mrs. H.M. Frankfort sent a letter to the Global Missions Office asking if they could establish a memorial fund for their son Ellis. They wanted it to be a scholarship to help train workers in Southeastern Asia for work in Sumatra or other Malayan groups. The Global Missions Board met and sent a letter to the Frankforts on December 17th of 1946, suggesting that a permanent fund that only the interest or gains from would be set up, and that a scholarship would help 3 different schools in Sumatra, Singapore, and Malaya. On January 11th, 1947, the Frankforts sent a letter and enclosed a check for $10,000. The Winans Ellis Frankfort Memorial Fund was established. To this day, it is still sending gifts to Southeastern Asia area, to missions that need it the most. I looked up what the value of $10,000 would be today from 1947, and it said about $136,000. Folks, it has been 76 years since that loving gift from grieving parents was set into motion, and it is still honoring their son Ellis Frankfort, and will be doing so for a long, long time. That is love.
These remains that I surveyed. This area is located northwest Saori before you get to the village of Makabo.
Tak usah turun sudah.
Turun dari bawah.
Tak usah. Dari atas ni.
Kalau depan itu
ada ya?
Itu ada. Sebab ini ada di sini. Ada tuh.
Ya. Kau pegang begitu. Kau pegang begitu baru ya dia foto.
Titik di bawah. Okay, we'll go over where the chief
Kau
is.
kasih lihat ya.
What's the chief's name?
His name?
Yeah.
Jacob.
Jacob?
Makar.
Makar.
Yeah.
Like Fenstermaker.
Yeah, like Fenstermaker.
So he might be he's related to us then. Let's see if I can get a...
Kau pegang. Kau pegang dia punya itu. Baru laki-laki dia foto dari atas.
Is it banyak?
Ada banyak di bawah kah?
Banyak.
Kira-kira berapa?
Pegang batu dia pegang.
Let's slowly.
Yeah, Paul, if you see any snake, call her.
Nanti aku punya parang satu kasih anak tuh potong itu apa tuh rotan kecil itu. Lalu ikan ya, kita naik terus apa?
Kenapa? Mau
But, okay. That's what? So I wonder why the, let's see, that's one. Some on the...
Itu.
But the head comes apart there. Not, there's just gone. But mungkin this is for red. But they're just right around in here. I wonder why they're here in this place. They say they were bombed or no?
Yeah, they suffered the bomb.
Bomb hit this?
Yeah.
Because it's deteriorating so fast now. So there's maybe 7 or 8 of them. But some of them, the teeth are all gone.
Mm-hmm.
But food, knocking, and just eating shells. I don't understand why they, see that dalam down in there?
Yeah, tidak dalam, not deep.
And no clothing or anything.
I think maybe no.
They weren't eaten, were they?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd say no.
Ini yang gelap kita ada air di dalam, kan tidak?
Maybe dia.
Dah mesti ada air di dalam.
They would have some water back in here.
Dalam ini dia di bawah.
I don't know if you could still, can you still see something in the camera?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so it's picking up low light. There's no paper here we can throw back in the cave here.
Ini yang dalam.
Mana?
Ini.
Ini bisa tembus.
Pernah masuk belum?
Ada masuk. Pakai senter.
Jauh ke dalam.
Ada tengkorak.
Oh, tidak bisa terlalu dalam.
Did the roof come down?
Yeah.
Or did this go all the way across?
All the way across.
All the way across,
Yeah.
and then had an opening over there where we came down.
Yeah.
And then what, the Americans put a bomb over there?
Yeah, I think maybe so.
That's why these trees have fallen in, because they're up on the top there.
Yeah.
That's not, that's later where this thing caved in. So under here, there's probably banyak.
Yeah. I think maybe banyak here, but inside maybe.
Ini kepala. Kalau ini orang-orang Jepang kepala ini. Ini mungkin non tembak-tembak dorang kepala sendiri,
Opa iba inom si Biak Jepang si Biak opa iba. Nah,